The night Marcus Hale agreed to help a stranger, he told himself it would cost him nothing. He was wrong. It would cost him everything he thought he knew about himself, and give him back something he had stopped believing he deserved. It was raining in Chicago the way it only rains in late autumn, cold and relentless.
You're watching Wake Up Files, where every story carries a message of hope, kindness, and unexpected miracles. If you believe one story can inspire millions, press like, share this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Wake Up Files so you never miss a story like this.
The kind of rain that soaks through your jacket before you even realize it's falling. Marcus was standing in the lobby of the Meridian Tower, the luxury residential building where he worked the evening maintenance shift 3 nights a week. His real job, the one that paid almost nothing, was writing freelance copy for small businesses that could barely afford him. The maintenance gig kept the lights on. More importantly, it kept his 7-year-old daughter Rosie in ballet classes, and the refrigerator stocked with the strawberry yogurt she refused to live without. He had not planned on speaking to anyone that night. He had a leaking pipe on the 14th floor, a flickering hallway light on the 9th, and a thermostat complaint from the penthouse that his supervisor had marked urgent. He was tired in the way that single fathers are always tired, not just physically, but in some deeper structural way, as if the fatigue had built itself into the foundation of who he was. He had been that tired for 3 years, ever since his wife Carla had walked out the door and decided that the life they had built together was too small for the person she was becoming. She had left him with Rosie, a second-hand couch, and the quiet understanding that he would have to figure out the rest on his own. He was crossing the marble lobby toward the elevator when he saw her. She was standing near the front entrance, still in her coat, her dark hair pulled back but coming loose in pieces around her face. She was holding a phone in one hand and a thick manila folder in the other. And even from across the room, Marcus could see that something was wrong. Not wrong in the way that people look when they've had a bad day. Wrong in the way that people look when the thing they have spent years building is about to collapse in their hands. Her name, though he did not know it yet, was Serena Voss. And she was, as the board of directors of Voss Capital Group had been reminding her all week, 48 hours away from the most important presentation of her professional life. Marcus almost kept walking. He was not the type to insert himself into situations that didn't involve him. He had learned, through years of quiet living, that most people wanted to solve their own problems in peace. But something about the way she was standing, not crying, not panicking, just utterly, completely still in the middle of the busy lobby, made him slow down and stop. He asked her if she was all right, and she looked up at him with the expression of someone who had forgotten that other people existed in the room. She told him no, actually, she was not all right, and then she seemed surprised by her own honesty, as if she had not meant to say it out loud. She explained quickly, in the clear and efficient way of someone who had learned to communicate in bullet points, that she had a critical presentation to the board in 2 days, and she had just discovered that the entire data visualization section of her deck was corrupted. Her designer was unreachable. Her assistant had just tested positive for the flu. And she was standing in the lobby of her own building at 9:45 at night, holding a folder of printed backup charts that looked like they had been assembled by someone who had never seen a bar graph before. Marcus looked at the folder she held out, almost reflexively. He had spent years writing copy and creating content for businesses. He had worked with enough marketing decks and investor presentations to know his way around one. He told her this. He told her he could probably help if she wanted, and that he had finished most of his maintenance rounds for the night. He said it the way a person says something they expect to be refused. She did not refuse. She lived in the penthouse, which Marcus only discovered when she pressed the button in the elevator, and he realized that the thermostat complaint he was supposed to address that night belonged to her. The irony was not lost on him. He had been summoned to fix her apartment before he ever met her. The space inside was the kind of space that makes you recalibrate your understanding of how other people live. It was not ostentatious. Exactly, there were no gold fixtures or oil paintings of horses. But it was precise and considered in a way that spoke of serious money spent by someone with genuine taste. The furniture was clean-lined and expensive. The floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city and the rain, the lights of Chicago smearing gold and red in the wet glass. There was a single framed photograph on the bookshelf, a woman who looked like a younger version of Serena, laughing on a beach somewhere warm. She cleared space on the dining table without apologizing for the papers already spread across it. She made coffee without asking if he wanted any, and set a cup in front of him without making it feel like hospitality. It felt more like a working arrangement, which Marcus found oddly comfortable. He was not there to be charmed or to charm. He was there because someone needed help, and he knew how to give it. They worked for 4 hours. He rebuilt her data slides from scratch using the backup charts and a laptop she handed him with her presentation software already open. He restructured the narrative flow of the deck, moving her financial projections earlier in the presentation where they would land with more impact, and reframing her expansion strategy in language that felt human rather than corporate. She sat across the table from him and watched, occasionally leaning over to point at something or ask a question, and he noticed that she asked good questions, sharp, direct, never the same question twice. Around midnight she told him something had changed in the room, and he understood what she meant. The anxiety that had been sitting on her like a second coat when he first saw her in the lobby had quieted. Not disappeared, she was still clearly wound tight, still carrying the weight of whatever was riding on this presentation, but the immediate crisis had passed. The work was done. The deck was clean and compelling and ready. He closed the laptop and stood to leave, and she looked at him across the table with an expression he couldn't quite read. She thanked him in a way that was simple and direct and contained no performance. She told him she would have his building management credit the cost of that month's maintenance call. He told her that wasn't necessary. She told him it was, and he understood that this was not a woman who often said things she didn't mean. He rode the elevator down alone, stepped back out into the lobby, and finished his last maintenance round of the night. He drove home in the rain, picked up Rosie's stuffed rabbit from the floor where it had fallen off the couch, tucked it back next to his sleeping daughter, and stood in the doorway of her room for a long moment in the dark. Then he went to bed and thought, for reasons he couldn't quite explain, that something had shifted in the quiet architecture of his ordinary life. He did not expect to see her again. But 3 mornings later, he was dropping Rosie off at her school on Pelham Street when he saw Serena Voss standing on the sidewalk outside the coffee shop 2 doors down, talking on her phone. She was wearing a different coat, charcoal gray, sharply cut, and she had the same quality of focused attention shed had at the table that night, fully present in whatever she was doing. He almost walked past. But she looked up and saw him, and something in her expression shifted in a way that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one. She ended her call. She asked him how he was. He told her fine, he was fine, just dropped his daughter off at school. There was a pause that should have been awkward and wasn't. She asked if he wanted coffee, gesturing at the shop behind her, and he said yes before he had time to think about whether it was a good idea. They sat at a small table near the window and talked for 40 minutes. Not about the presentation or the building or the maintenance call. They talked about Chicago and about the particular loneliness of high-pressure work and about a book they had both read years apart and remembered differently. Serena told him about growing up in a small apartment in Detroit with a mother who worked double shifts and a father who was intermittently present and always brilliant and never reliable. She told him she had built Voss Capital from a consulting firm she started at 26 with $30,000 and a contact list she had assembled through 5 years of working harder than anyone in every room she entered. Marcus told her about Rosie. He told her about the ballet classes and the strawberry yogurt and the way his daughter had recently started asking complicated questions about where her mother was, questions he did his best to answer honestly without making them land like accusations. He told her that the hardest part of single parenthood was not the exhaustion or the money, though those were hard. The hardest part was the loneliness of being the only one who knew everything about your child's every fear, every small triumph, every nightmare, and having no one to share it with at the end of the day. Serena listened without filling the silences. He noticed she was good at that. She texted him 4 days later. She said the board presentation had gone well. Better than well. Actually, the board had approved the expansion proposal and increased the development budget by 30% above what she had asked for. She said she owed him more than a waived maintenance call. He wrote back that he was glad it went well. She wrote back asking if he wanted to have dinner sometime. He stared at the message for a long time. Then he typed yes and put the phone face down on the table. and sat with the specific anxiety of someone who has agreed to something that feels simultaneously right and terrifying. The dinner was at a quiet restaurant she knew in Lincoln Park, not expensive in a showy way, but clearly good, the kind of place where the menu was short and the food was serious. She arrived exactly on time. She was wearing something simple and dark and her hair was down. And Marcus had the strange experience of seeing someone he thought he understood, from one context, and realizing there were entire rooms inside them he hadn't entered yet. They talked for 3 hours. The conversation moved in the unhurried way of two people who have discovered they are interested in each other, and are not in a rush to perform that interest. He told her more about Rosie. She told him about the company, about what it had cost her to build it, not in money, but in years and relationships, and the particular isolation of being a woman in rooms full of men who were waiting for her to make a mistake so they could feel comfortable again. She told him there had been someone, a few years ago, someone serious, who had told her she could either be the person she was building herself into, or she could be someone who came home for dinner. She had chosen the building. She said she did not regret it, and then she said she was not entirely sure that was true. Marcus told her that was one of the most honest things anyone had said to him in years. What followed was not a montage or a fairy tale. It was slow and real, and sometimes uncomfortable in the way that real things are. He met with her twice more in the following 2 weeks, once for lunch near the Meridian Tower, and once for a walk along the lakefront on a cold Sunday afternoon that Rosie spent at her grandmother's house. They talked and they were quiet, and they were occasionally awkward in the small, humanizing way of two people who are figuring out the edges of something new. Then Rosie got sick. It was only a bad cold, the kind of thing children cycle through without drama, but it knocked her out for 3 days, and Marcus stayed home from everything: the maintenance job, the freelance deadlines, everything to sit beside her on the couch with soup and cartoons, and the rabbit tucked under her arm. On the second afternoon he got a text from Serena asking how he was, and he replied honestly, which surprised him. He told her Rosie was sick, and he was tired, and the apartment smelled like eucalyptus vapor rub, and he hadn't slept more than 4 hours in 2 nights. She replied asking if she could bring dinner. He said yes again, and again it felt both right and terrifying. She showed up at 6 o'clock with bags from a Thai place Rosie had never had but immediately declared she loved. Rosie, who had been wan and unimpressed by the world all day, sat up from the couch when Serena walked in and looked at her with the uncomplicated, direct curiosity of a 7-year-old. Serena sat down on the floor next to the coffee table and asked Rosie what she was watching, and within 20 minutes, they were watching it together, and Rosie had moved her rabbit from its customary spot to a position that was technically on Serena's lap. Marcus stood in the kitchen doorway watching them and felt something in his chest that he had not felt in 3 years. It was not happiness, exactly, or not only happiness. It was something more specific than that. It was the feeling of being witnessed, of existing in a room where someone else understood what mattered. He learned the full scope of who she was gradually, in pieces, the way you learn anyone real. He knew she was successful. He did not know, until her name appeared in a business publication that a colleague sent him a link to, that Voss Capital Group managed nearly $4 billion in assets, and that Serena had been named one of the most influential women in American finance for the 3rd consecutive year. He read the article on his phone during a break at the maintenance job, sitting on a metal folding chair in the basement utility room, and he felt the specific vertigo of discovering that someone you have been getting to know is also a figure who exists in the world in a way you had not fully understood. He almost said something to her about it that night. He didn't. Instead, he sat with it, and he examined what he felt, and what he felt was not intimidated, or not only intimidated. What he felt was something more complicated, a quiet questioning of whether he had anything real to offer someone who had built a world like that, whether the things he had, his steadiness, his care, his capacity for showing up, were enough to matter in the context of her life. He brought it up finally, directly, the way he did most things. They were in the lobby of the Meridian Tower again, which felt fitting, that marble room where he had first seen her standing still in the middle of everything moving. He told her he had read the article. He told her he was trying to understand what this was, between them, and whether it made sense. He told her he was a single father who worked a maintenance job 3 nights a week, and wrote copy for businesses that most people had never heard of, and that he did not want to pretend that was a different thing than what it was. She looked at him for a moment without speaking. Then she said something that he would replay many times in the months that followed. She told him she had spent her entire adult life in rooms full of people who were performing versions of themselves, performing confidence, performing authority, performing the idea of being someone worth listening to. She told him he was the first person in as long as she could remember who had simply been present, without performance, without agenda, without the exhausting calculus of how he was coming across. She told him that was not a small thing. She told him that was, in her experience, an extraordinarily rare thing. He didn't know what to say, so he said he was glad he had been in the lobby that night. She said she was too. It was Rosie who settled the question, as children often do, without meaning to, and without knowing there was a question to settle. It was a Saturday afternoon in early December, and the three of them had spent the day doing nothing in particular: a grocery run, a walk through the neighborhood to look at the holiday lights that had appeared in windows overnight, lunch at a diner where Rosie ordered a hot chocolate and spent 15 minutes engineering the whipped cream into a shape she found satisfactory. On the walk back, Rosie reached up without any preamble or fanfare and took Serena's hand, the way children do when they have decided about someone, and Serena looked down at the small hand in hers and then looked up, and Marcus saw in her face something he recognized because he had felt it himself, the vertigo of being given something you had not known you were waiting for. Later, after Rosie was in bed and the apartment was quiet, Serena sat on the second-hand couch with a cup of tea and looked around at the space, the books on the shelves, Rosie's drawings taped to the refrigerator, the rabbit sitting on the windowsill like a small sentry, and she said that this place felt more like a home than anywhere she had lived in years. Marcus sat down next to her and told her she was welcome in it. She looked at him and said she knew that. She said that was what made it mean something. They did not rush. They built it slowly, the way you build anything that is meant to last, with attention and honesty and the willingness to stay in the room when things got complicated. There were complicated moments. There were nights when Serena worked late and Marcus sat with the old familiar loneliness and had to remind himself that a person being ambitious was not the same as a person being absent. There were mornings when Rosie cried for her mother, and Marcus held her and answered her questions as honestly as he could, and afterwards sat alone in the kitchen trying to hold his own grief in a shape that didn't swallow him. There were hard conversations, the kind that require two people to sit across from each other and say true things that are not comfortable to say, but they stayed in the room. And what grew in that room, slowly and without announcement, was something that neither of them had been looking for, and both of them recognized when it arrived. It was the particular piece of being known, of being the full, complicated weight of yourself in front of another person, and having that person stay. Marcus had forgotten that this was something that could happen to him. He had stopped believing, somewhere in the quiet grief of Carla leaving, that he was someone worth staying for. Serena had built a world that was brilliant and expansive, and full of movement, and had learned to believe that staying in one place with one person, in one small, ordinary life, was a thing she had given up. They were both wrong. In the specific way that people are wrong when they have been alone long enough, that they have mistaken their loneliness for their identity. On a Tuesday evening in February, the three of them were sitting at the dining table, the same table where Marcus and Serena had worked through the night on a corrupted presentation, the night this all began, and Rosie was doing homework with her tongue pressed thoughtfully against her upper lip, which was what she did when something required concentration. Serena was reading something on her tablet, occasionally making notes. Marcus was making dinner and listening to the specific music of the room, the scratch of Rosie's pencil and the quiet beep of Serena's tablet, and the hiss of the pan on the stove, all of it layered together into something that sounded, he realized, exactly like what he had been building toward for years, without knowing what it was called. He stood at the stove and understood that this was what the story had been, all along. Not a story about a man who helped a woman with a presentation. Not a story about a CEO and a maintenance worker and the implausibility of two people from different worlds finding each other in a lobby on a rainy night. It was a story about the radical courage of showing up honestly in your own life, of doing the small, unglamorous, necessary things, fixing the pipe, making the coffee, sitting on the floor with a sick child, being present without performance, and trusting that those things are not lesser than the large and brilliant ones. It was a story about the possibility that the life you have been quietly, patiently building in the margins of your exhaustion might be exactly the life that someone else needs to walk into. Marcus Hale had agreed to help a stranger for one night. He had not known she was a CEO. He had not known she was someone whose world was vast and bright and full of movement, or that she would be the person who walked into his small, careful life and recognized it for what it was: a home. He had only known that someone needed help, and he knew how to give it. And it turned out that was enough. It turned out that it was, in fact, everything. If this story reached something in you, if it reminded you that ordinary people doing quiet, honest things can change the entire direction of a life, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Stories like this one exist because of the people who listen. Thank you for being one of them. Before we end, drop a comment below and tell us, what's one small act of kindness that changed your life? We read every single one. And to Marcus, and to every tired, steady, quietly remarkable person who keeps showing up, this one was for you.